Good morning and greetings, and welcome to the second of our 6 Wonder Grant presentations. We're very happy you could join us. You might be asking, what's a Wonder Grant? And we want to tell you. At One Workplace, we're curious about the thinkers and makers, the research and insights, the purposes, culture shifts, and trends that impact spaces where we work, learn, heal, and innovate. And we believe when we partner with pioneers, with experts and disruptors, when we question the status quo, we do our best work to ultimately shape the human experience and make built environments more livable. We introduced the Wonder Grant in 2019 to support exploration and research from the architect and design community into unique topics of interest and passion, and have awarded 9 Wonder Grants since then. 6 grants were awarded in 2020. I'm CCB, Director of Audience Development for One Workplace, and I'm honored to introduce one of our 2020 grant teams to you, Designing Justice and Designing Spaces. As a support coach for this team, I have watched their work progress over the past 9 months, and I am certain their results will share some insights that will bring positive impact to many people at their most vulnerable. But before I introduce the team, let me share a few logistics. At the end of Designing Justice, Designing Spaces presentation, we'll have a brief Q&A period. The Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be open, so during the presentation, please put your questions in there. We'll be sending out the recording of today's presentation within 24 hours, and it also will be available on our Wonder Grant section in the One Workplace website if you can't stay through the entire presentation. Now, to share their research into Spaces for Survivors, please meet Deanna Van Buren, co-founder, executive director, architect and leader, Tola Thomas, architecture leader and project manager from Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, and Dr. Barb Towes from the University of Washington and many other places. Take it away, Designing Justice, Designing Spaces.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. We're really excited to share what we've been working on for the past year. Thank you, CCB, for kind of guiding us along this process. And yeah, I guess we'll dive into the presentation. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So a little bit about our organization. We are Designing Justice, Designing Spaces. We are a nonprofit architectural, real estate, and development firm, and our work focuses on addressing the root causes of mass incarceration through the built environment. And our approach to addressing justice and design is by asking the question about what we're currently, like architects and designers' role currently in the justice system. And this is kind of what it looks like. We currently participating by building jails and this infrastructure that really emphasizes punishment over restorative justice models. And at Designing Justice, Design Spaces, we want to ask what we can build instead of these systems that kind of reinforce these ideologies. And we want to imagine a world where we're building things that can support systematic changes by getting to the root causes of mass incarceration. So instead of asking how we build better prisons and jails, we want to ask the question about what we can build instead. So our work focuses on prototyping new infrastructure that gets to the root causes of these issues. And this process isn't easy and it requires a lot of elastic and radical reimagination of how we think about justice and the infrastructure that is built to support it. And this process is really critical because this co-learning and co-designing with communities really allows us to really think really deeply about what we need to build and how we can build it. In addition to design, we also look at finance, policy, and programming. So we're constantly partnering with experts in the field who are also looking for this systematic change to really think robustly about these solutions. And part of this process does involve a lot of community engagement, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is one of the really critical pieces to this research that we've done. And one of these prototypes that we've been working on is this project, Spaces for Survivors. We're centered this project in Essex County, New Jersey, where after a violent crime or homicide occurs in a community, the justice professionals and community have to interact in a variety of spaces and environments. And these environments are often at police stations, detective offices, or even at the scene of the crimes themselves. So as you can imagine, you're experiencing this really traumatic event. We know that through extensive research that our built environment really influences our physical and emotional health and well-being. So given this really strong relationship, this project really focuses on researching how the physical environment can influence individuals' journey through this justice process, because a lot of times it's the first time people are going through the justice process in the justice system. So we wanted to see how the environment plays a part in that, and just really seeing how we can redesign these spaces to better address the needs of survivors who are going through this process. And at the end of the study, we'll be working with the Center for Coordinated Innovation to be publishing an environmental toolkit to help inform how these spaces for survivors look and feel. So I will pass it on to Barb to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the spaces and our research process.
Yeah, so in this study, we were focusing on two specific spaces within a prosecutor's office. And that was the waiting area in which survivors either wait to meet with detectives or prosecutors, or where they're actually sometimes meeting with prosecutors. Right here, we have kind of the entryway into this space, as well as the waiting space. So they go through one set of secure doors, which is number 1 here. Then they proceed down a small hallway, which is number 2. And then the waiting room there you can see as number 3 and 4. Then when they are going to actually, hopefully, go to a more private space to talk with the prosecutors or detectives, they go through a space that you can see there as numbered 5. Tola, could you switch? Then they go into, again, if they're lucky enough to get to this room, it's a more private conference room. To get there, they are walking through cubicles of detectives and prosecutors doing their work, talking about cases, having crime scene photos up and that sort of thing. And then they go into this conference room there. So we were looking at what is the impact of these spaces on survivors, or the perceived impact they would have on survivors, and what could be done to design the spaces to be more survivor oriented. So our method for doing that was twofold. We had a visual survey that we had people fill out, and we had approximately 24 people fill out that survey, and that asked them questions about how they would design, the next slides will go into more detail about that. We then also did virtual design sessions. By the end, had 11 workshops that involved 30 participants. So there you can see some of our recruitment material. We recruited through connections that Center for Court Innovation had, through a community task force organization, and then also through the Victim Advocate's Office, and used MailChimp, email blast kind of things, and had flyers and posters and a landing page on the web for people to connect with different parts of the survey. So to tell you a little bit more about the survey in more detail, you can see here an image. It was done on Typeform, and it was quantitative with multiple choice kind of answers, and some short answer kind of things too. And with the quantitative answers where they had choice options, we embedded images with that. So it was very much a visually stimulating survey. And then coming part A of it was asking them about designing a space in which they would have emotional and difficult conversations. So having them imagine and then responding to about 20 questions that are very specific to design about how they might design that space. Part B then got people thinking about either the actual prosecutor's office spaces or spaces in the community in which they sought services or where they provided services as survivors and professionals who work with survivors responded to the survey. We then were able to run descriptive statistics on those. The next methodology was the design labs, and these were really amazing, that anywhere in groups of 1 to 6 participants, be they survivors or people who work with survivors, met on Zoom, and then with a using Miro, a collaborative whiteboard, they responded to questions about how they wanted survivors to feel when they were in these spaces, how they likely felt when they were in prosecutor spaces, and we had images embedded in there of the existing spaces. And then about the other half of the time together, they actually did design work where there were layouts of the spaces to scale, and then almost like game pieces, different types of things that you would put into the room for design. And through engagement with the facilitators and with the help of architects who would then move and place things in the room based on what they were talking about, we ended up having about 15 designs of the waiting room area, and then also about 15 designs of the conference room. So as far as our preliminary findings, we started our workshops with asking people how they wanted to feel, and and also did designs. Let me backtrack here for a minute. We analyzed the layouts that people had created using codes that we had come up with in advance. So we captured all the layouts and images that people created in their design labs, and then analyzed them around different codes. So you can see an image of how we did that there. And we did that while all being in different locations in the country. And then we also, Tola, if you can keep moving, kind of where we started in our workshops was to ask people how they wanted people to feel when they were meeting with professionals, and then in those spaces in which they were meeting with professionals. At the time of the analysis, which the ONEder grant supported, we landed on 9 different emotions that people wanted survivors to feel. And what you're going to see here are 3 slides with 3 of those emotions on each of those slides. And we'll just slowly move through them so you can get a sense of what people are saying. So Tola, whenever you're just ready to move on, just go ahead and do that. We then asked people about how they thought survivors felt in the existing spaces. And to do that, they viewed these collection of images of 3 different spaces that survivors may be at, 2 in the prosecutor's office and the 1 in the victim service waiting room. And so in discussing this, learn from them how they perceive survivors actually feeling in these spaces. So the next 3 slides, similar to before, are going to be 3 emotions for each slide. And as you look through them, just kind of note what you're seeing about the differences between what they wanted survivors to feel and how survivors were actually feeling in these spaces.
I could just, as you're going through them, Tola, just share, like, some of these quotes, like "scared as hell," right, pop out to me, right? Being interrogated and intimidated really struck me when we were doing the work. And then some obvious ones to us designers.
It's actually interesting during the workshops that the staff members themselves also acknowledged some of these same observations that the survivors were. Like, they also were like, the space can feel like a jail. It's very confined. You don't know where you are. There's no window. So it was really interesting to see how the overlap between the participants, staff, and also the survivors.
In the survey, we asked people to rate numerically how well they thought the prosecutor's space was designed. And in the survey, they gave it a rating overall average of 3, which is kind of in the middle of, yeah, it's kind of safe and supportive and secure and calming, and kind of not. So it came out in the middle, which that numerical rating was kind of surprising, given what we were hearing in the actual workshops, but it gives us something at least to hang our hat on what they're thinking about. As far as the findings then, more broadly, we were able to articulate some clear design preferences that people had in order to create the feelings and facilitate those feelings that they wanted survivors to have. And so here you can see our collection of design preferences. Here we have 11 of them. As we have continued on with the analysis, we have about 25 different design characteristics across 5 different categories. So here is just kind of what you're going to see as the start of our analysis. Some of them, even just by looking at them, shouldn't be surprising to you as architects. The first one, clearly that was super important, was that of nature. Across the board, everybody wanted nature of some kind in their space. And that, again, we're thinking about this in the context of facilitating the feelings we want survivors to have. Also would love to have windows in that space because of the access it gives you to the outside and the views of the outside, as well as natural light. They also thought about lighting, so that idea of natural light, but also having it balanced with soft and warm lighting that would come more from fixtures, be it overhead lights or floor lamps or table lamps. Seating was really important. They thought a lot about it. They wanted soft seats. They wanted seats that were clustered so that you could kind of have your own private space, even though you couldn't totally block yourself off, but that you could kind of create that community with whoever you're with. So that was really important. They wanted diversity of seating so that they could actually have options of where they were going to sit, and also liked to be around tables as well, so that there was a place to kind of do things and to set your coffee, set your phone, set all that sort of stuff with magazines and that sort of thing. In the conference
And you see how, I just wanted to point out like how diverse these designs are compared to the existing spaces. If you remember the current space, I think it's like 6 chairs on either side, and they're just all the same, and they're all facing each other. So in the design workshop, we saw that there was a need to really activate the space a little bit more. So you'll see that in a lot of these designs, that there's just a lot more activation of the furniture, the walls, and all the surfaces.
In the conference room, which is a very different room, the way some of them talked about it is that's the business room. And so they wanted a certain look to it and feel to it, because it is a place of business where you're going to have the tough conversation. And so they really imagined it as being a space that would have a table around you with you gather, then chairs around that. So they still wanted soft chairs, but ones that maybe weren't quite as casual and relaxed as the other room. And so there was a really strong feel here with people that the rooms need to be designed for the purpose of the room and really facilitate whatever that purpose was. So the seating for that room looked a little bit different. Furnishings was looking at tables, other kinds of accessories that they might want in the room. So here, coffee tables were really big. They wanted a place to put their stuff. And as we'll see later, having access to coffee and water was important. So they would want a place to put that. Also data tech ports. People can sometimes be in that room 4, 6, 8 hours. They wouldn't necessarily come with a full charged phone. And so having availability for that was really important. Art and imagery came up. Almost everybody wanted some kind of art in the room, something else to focus on and to distract people from why they were there. You can't fully distract them, but you can at least offer visual things in the room so that they don't dwell on it and they can kind of take their mind off of it a little bit. So art became really important for calming people down. And that art could take on multiple forms: nature, paintings, motivational statements, just kind of anything. What we're calling objects of comfort. Several big things with that are distractions. They wanted things, whether it was a TV, whether it was magazines, artwork, something to take their mind off of why they were there. If you think back to the earlier image, there was nothing. The walls were blank. It was all just that institutional white. Nothing was there for distraction. So that was very
I'd
important.
also add real quick about food and drink, just because I think that's always amazing, right? Because it's sort of part of, it's an object of comfort, but it's also a way of caring for oneself. And we saw a lot of people wanting just get some water, like a coffee, some tea, some kind of hospitality going to comfort myself. And it seems obvious, but there's nothing there right now except a bunch of paper cups that you have to go out in the hall to get water in a cup this size.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to just quickly keep moving through these. We have the outdoors were also very important to talk about. The the waiting room had no door on it. And believe it or not, people would sit in there, and that hallway was the only hallway for law enforcement, prosecutors, and suspects to come through. And so from there in the waiting room, survivors who were there could actually see and hear the work of the office going on. And that would include suspects being brought in handcuffed, they may be bloody, all these different sorts of things. So a lot of conversation about wall to block or doors to block people from those sites, but also doors to give them privacy. That they've made the choice to come into the office. They don't necessarily want to be there. They don't want people to see them there. And so that door provided a lot of privacy. We also had to talk about the materiality of the door. Would it be opaque or transparent? And when transparent, at least partially transparent, was the overriding desire, but yet recognizing it needed to be done in such a way that still could provide privacy, whether that was through fogging or curtains or something like that.
Yeah, and one more thing to add about this, the signage piece too. I remember hearing from one of the, in the workshops about how I think a mother came in and she didn't have any idea why she was there at the prosecutor's office. And it wasn't until she got past the second set of doors where she saw homicide unit that it really just kind of set in that this was what she was there for, that she had to kind of talk about a loved member that had passed away. So even just having signage that's welcoming and just more coordinated, so it's a little bit more professional. So when people are there for the first time, there's a sense of centering and like it's able to really guide them through the spaces rather than it be this really stark thing that gives them information like that.
And then sounds also were important with people wanting to hear soft music in the background or nature sounds. And again, that was a really important part of calming experience. And then with color, wanting neutral or light colors, and then using accessories to bring in colors of interest that go beyond that. And then there are just a collection of other things that are being explored around thermal comfort. We know from the survey, people want a nice moderate temperature and just kind of in the middle of in terms of humidity and dryness. Materiality, it's really about soft and puffy even. Scents, that was largely in the survey of people wanting the smell of hot beverages, like a coffee, tea, hot chocolate smell, or any kind of nature smell, really. And then size, this nice mix of big enough to move around and not feel crowded, but small enough to feel intimate and creating little pockets. So those are the major design.
So these next couple of images will start to show how some of these design characteristics and ideas are starting to be applied to the existing prosecutor's office spaces. And then it'll just kind of show you some of our initial kind of explorations on how to rethink how these spaces look and feel and work. We'll just start off with the waiting area. One of the things that was really apparent was that the size of these rooms, like Barb mentioned, are just not big enough to accommodate the multiple families that might be there at a time. So in this concept, you'll see in that plan in the middle, we're thinking about maybe expanding the room out to create these built-in wooden nooks that allow for multiple groups to be there at a time, but also provide some sense of separation and privacy from all the activity that might be happening in that main corridor or other families that are in that waiting area. Then also thinking that there are some situations where expanding a room is just not realistic or feasible. So one of our ideas is to propose multiple ways to achieve these desired experiences or feelings in the space. So in the previous one, we talked about building in nooks, but in this one, we're thinking about a way to achieve that same idea of privacy and separation through furniture solutions. So some of you might recognize some of this steel case furniture that we've kind of plopped in here as a way to provide acoustic separation, but also these kind of like nooks that aren't built in, but it's still a way to provide a diverse seating options for multiple families that are in the spaces. And then Barb, I'll let you talk a little bit more about the objects of comfort.
Okay, so with the objects of comfort, as I mentioned earlier, that was really thinking about things that would calm and distract people, and providing hospitality and that sort of thing. So when we're thinking about that in this particular design, it's really drawing on that and getting at kind of those comforts of home, and home away from home is what one person called the waiting room in particular. So you can see like coat hooks there on the left, which brings in that domestic home kind of space. Have the plants and kind of that living room feel in the bottom image there. The blankets and the soft feel if we look at the blue and white over there. So really trying to bring in that feeling of home, of comfort, of hospitality, of welcome into the space.
And then as we move to the other space, which is the meeting and conference room area, what we really wanted to focus on was really creating a clean finish, or a way for the room to seem organized and a little bit more intentional. One of the things that was brought up in some of the workshops from the existing spaces was how cluttered and unorganized it looked. And as you can imagine, someone coming in here to speak with the detective, this added stress of clutter is just a little bit counterproductive to the feelings and desired experiences that someone would want to feel in this space. So we've also looked at a way to bring in that idea of food and drinks to the space. So we're proposing possibly putting in a kitchenette in the back of the room so folks can easily access water or just something to drink or eat in case they get a little bit hungry in the space. And it's just a way to, as Deanna mentioned, just show a little bit more, I guess, care and inviting people into the spaces rather than someone having to bring them a tiny cup from another room. And then another piece that was also important was providing a way to keep the walls clean of also other information that might be left over from previous detectives using the room. So having these whiteboard walls that can be cleaned and erased, and just making the room a little bit more organized and intentional. And then the last two things we were looking on these explorations was how lighting can help achieve some of these desired experiences. So in this one, we're showing rounded light fixtures in the space that kind of soften the space a little bit more. Currently, there's the harsh fluorescence, so bringing in something that's a little bit calmer and not so stark. Then lastly, just seeing if there's a way we can simulate natural lighting in the space. The prosecutor's office, these individual rooms have no access to the outdoors, so we're proposing possibly using some type of artificial lighting systems that could simulate daylighting. So if someone is in here for hours on time, they have some connection or some simulation of being in a space that has access to outdoor light and natural light. So right now we're currently refining these design studies, and we're going to start incorporating these things into some consolidated proposals that we're going to share with the prosecutor's office to get their feedback on it, and then yeah, we will go from there and refine the toolkit, and then work with CCI to publish these findings, so other people looking to create these spaces for survivors have more research and design guidelines to help them create these spaces for survivors. That is it.
I guess I'll pull myself back in here. Thanks so much, Tolan, Barb, and Deanna. Having been involved in just listening into the process, I have a question about how did COVID affect your research and community engagement process? Because I know that there were some curveballs. And then how did this process kind of compare to how you typically engage with communities around the creative process?
Yeah, so at a certain point, I think it was in February, we had planned on taking a trip out to Essex to actually do these workshops in person, which is typically how we have done community engagement at Design Justice, where we have these workshops with real scale plans, there's music, everyone's kind of like in the mode of design, where we're actually moving to scale pieces of furniture and rooms around to really envision these spaces. And given COVID, we weren't able to go out there, so we had to rethink how we were going to do these engagement workshops. So we stumbled across this virtual whiteboard tool. Some of you might have heard of it, Miro, which allowed us to still collaboratively co-design with the participants and survivors. And it really, while there were some limitations, it also opened up new opportunities. Like in real time, we could be dropping in images from Google. We can sketch things in different places. And I think it probably allowed us to extend our engagement period a little bit longer, because we weren't fixed to like just a weekend or a week in New Jersey. We were able to spread it out over a couple of months in 2020 and 2021.
Did you have a difficulty? One of the questions was, were you surveying actual survivors? And I know that you've talked about there were survivors and there were professionals that were part of the survey. How did you manage through that?
Yeah, Barb, do you want to talk a little bit more about that recruitment process?
Yeah, so we did have survivors participating, but the majority of respondents were people who were professionals who work with survivors, either as victim advocates or law enforcement or prosecutors or community health people. We couldn't recruit survivors in the numbers that we were hoping for. So that was a little disappointing. And since we were working through other organizations to kind of be the gatekeepers for us, we weren't able to make direct contact. What we were really pleased with, though, is that, you know, we did have survivors participate. And when you look at how survivors said they experienced the space, or if they hadn't been in that exact space, how they think they would have experienced it, and then listen to how the professionals talked about it, there was overlap, which was interesting that the professionals knew how people would experience those spaces. And that's part of it, that they experienced very much the same experience, particularly in some of the spaces. And so I feel really confident about what we get. But I think this process was really successful. It's very exciting what we learned, that I think it's safe to say that we're now seeing the start of a data set that we'll just keep adding to, and being more intentional and making sure that we're adding survivor voices. And when we can go back to being face-to-face, really looking at how we can actively recruit people who've been survivors.
That's great, thanks. There's a comment here which kind of has a question in it. That the comment is, you know, so impressed by the heartfelt and mindful design addressing the senses and the emotions. And the question in there is, was that surprising to you about all of the feeling and the sensory kind of requests?
I was surprised that the prosecutors and the detectives were like into aromatherapy. That was a surprise to me. You never know. That was their idea.
Well, I'm going to say, I took the survey, and the way that the questions are asked, it actually does put you in that place. I mean, and you've got enough of the visuals to kind of go, oh my gosh, I so would not want to be anywhere near that, the way that it looks. And then, yeah, how would I rather feel? It opened up that fairly easily, I think. Here's a question from another one of our Wonder Grant winners, Larry Strain, asking, spaces that work for survivors also seem like they'd work better for the people who have to work there every day. So it's reiterating that.
Mhm.
Were there any other surprises that you came upon in this work? And I'm going to ask that, and then I want to ask another question.
I think one of the things that was surprising for me was how well people could articulate the connection between feeling and design. Because it's not something that we think about or do every day. And they could articulate, I don't feel calm because of this particular part of the design. I feel disrespected and insignificant because of this particular part of the design. And it just, just gives so much credit to how people experience environments. And we just ask the right question, they can help us really understand the spaces they're coming into.
I would agree. The survey was extremely well crafted, and I know how much time and effort you put into how you did that. I'm wondering about is there any crossover between the findings that you came across in this study and other work from Designing Justice, Designing Spaces in the restorative justice world?
I think so. I think Barb and I both were drawing on other projects and other research that we'd done all the time and pulling it into this work. I kept thinking a lot about the Syracuse Peacemaking Center, where you have survivors coming and those who've committed harm into the same space, and hearing a lot of the same things, the need for control, the sort of materiality piece, the hospitality piece with coffee, tea, all that stuff. So a lot of things are the need to have distraction. That was a real comment, like, oh, and when I come into a space, I need distractions from me and what's happening for me. So that was also very similar. What about you, Barb, some of your research?
Yeah, I'm thinking to an earlier project that I did with a victim service organization in Canada, where the space is the service. It's a place for them to go. It's like a victim witness waiting room on steroids. It's a whole house-like feel where people can go. And a lot of the things that we heard here are similar to what was heard in that particular study. And that was before they had a space. So people were thinking like prospectively about what kind of space did they want to have. And it's also very consistent with what's happening, what we know about the impact of nature. That we know nature is good for people, but we haven't thought about what does that mean in the context of justice settings. We know that people need privacy for psychological health and for restoration and for creativity, but yet we don't think about that in the context of justice spaces. So I think that's one of the exciting things, is that we're able to make some of those direct linkages between what we already know and these particular spaces.
Okay, then I have a question about the nature of designing justice, designing spaces. And given the fact that you're a not-for-profit, for-profit, how do you have to find entities to invite you in to conduct this type of research, or do you go out and look for opportunities?
We do both. I mean, I think the organization started with us going to look for folks that were innovators and be like, hey, don't you need spaces for peacemaking? And they finally caved, CCI being one of them, and now they're a repeat client around after hounding them. So, and then sometimes people do come to us, but we really like strong program providers, like people or very innovative groups within an institution. We look for them, they come to us. And when we have a good fit, we're able to do a project.
Okay, if anyone else has a question, can you please put it in the Q&A, because we're actually going to try and wrap this up right now. It looks like someone just popped one in. How do you get folks to even care about design in the first place enough to think about it and realize that it goes far deeper than just being pretty? I'm having a really tough time getting folks in my office to take it seriously. Okay, there's a little self-help.
I mean, that is an experience we've had quite a bit. What we found is if we can invite them into a process, we get them every time, right? So we have a lot. We've had resistance. We had people in this project, if you told Barb, remember, who had some resistance, right? But as soon as they get engaged in the process, they're in trouble because they're going down. Like, we're always able to kind of get them to engage and loosen up, but you've got to get them to the table. And you can, I offer food, we offer bribes, we offer money, we go where they're just hanging out, like we really like pop up, you're sitting there having your lunch. Hey, let's do some fun. Let's have a process. So invite them in to something enjoyable. We gamify it, make it fun and playful and gamify it. And next thing you know, almost every time, this is inside of institutional settings, this might be in a governmental office, the hardest people we've seen soften up and get into design. And that's why I think it's actually innate.
Mm-hmm.
Innate thing.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, we spent a lot of time really, like Barb mentioned, asking the right questions rather than just showing them like, here's a room, design it. We did that two-step process with a survey where we just kind of got them thinking about their somatic experiences in these spaces. Like, just really think about how your body feels in these situations, and then we'll get to the design. So really making sure that the process is tied to these real-world experiences that people have was really helpful, because once they understood the purpose of the spaces and the emotions that needed to be felt, translating it to design, like Barb mentioned again, it was just like not always easy, but it was an easier process to correlate the two because they were tied to actual emotions and experiences they wanted to feel in those spaces.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tola and Barb and Deanna, for sharing the research and the insights. And I want to say thanks to all of our listeners who joined in and watched this. But I will tell you that the Wonder Grant, this recording, as well as all of the research, is available on the One Workplace website. So if you have more interest in learning more about the project itself, there is an in-depth research package that will be housed there. We will send out this recording in the next 24 hours. It also will be available on the website. And there are 4 more Wonder Grants that will be shared over the next 4 Tuesdays, so that we hope you'll be able to join us. And finally, the Wonder Grant 2021 application is open as of April 1st, and it closes June 16th, June 18th. So we'd love to hear your ideas. If you've got something that you'd love to do more study on, please be in touch. And we're signing off for the Wonder Grant presentation.